What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Around the VLA. It has been a while, but we are back, and we're back just in time. We've got a lot to cover leading up to the VLA Cup, the 2023 VLA Cup. Not this weekend, but next weekend. And I'm Rob St. Clair, live from Chicago. That's Vince Sanzuki, live from Phoenix, Arizona. We've got a lot to cover between now and the tournament that seems to be breaking its own record year over year for biggest and best professional volleyball event in the country. So I'm stoked for it. We've got a lot to get to. Just sort of like a scheduling note before we dive in. Vince, let me know if this doesn't seem reasonable. But next week's show is when we'll dive into the VLA Cup tournament itself, like the format and all the teams and all the pools and some of the rosters and just kind of how everything is going to go. But this show, tonight, we can catch up with kind of some of the storylines around the league. We've had a couple events since the last time we did a show. We've got a handful of things to announce, a handful of things to spotlight, and just sort of have some conversations about what's going on around the VLA leading into the VLA Cup tournament. That sound good?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Also, we won't have any kind of finalized positions or anything like that because there's still matches that are going to be happening in Tier 2 this weekend, and so we really don't have the brackets established until next Monday anyway. So it doesn't make sense to go over the pools or anything yet because we don't have them yet.
We don't have them yet, right? Yeah, the format of the VLA Cup tournament is set, and it's actually all up on the website already. I'll take you all through that in a little bit, but yeah, like Vince said, the seeds will, and therefore the pools will lock on Monday because I know we've got some Tier 2 action this weekend. I think Cleveland and Columbus are playing a little bit. There might be a couple others going on, but yeah, that's the beauty of Tier 2 is they can play any given weekend, and so for the VLA Cup tournament, the seeds will lock them and the rosters will lock the Monday before. So stay tuned for next week's show. We'll talk a lot more about the VLA Cup tournament itself, but first, Vince, speaking of divisional cup tournaments, we got to talk about Team LVC. Since the last show we did was just before the East Division Cup, didn't get to squeeze one in after the East Division Cup because I was a little bit busy going off getting married and going on my honeymoon. But we got to talk about Team LVC. Team LVC wins the East Division Cup in Albany. They beat the Kentucky Unicorns 3-1 in the final. And now, sure enough, Vince, all three divisional cups this year have been won by the Tier 1 teams that would have been considered the favorites in those divisions going into the year.
Yeah, even more interesting is that all three of those teams did win their respective divisions last season.
Right.
So them coming in and being the favorites this year, I mean, it was a good turn for Tier 1 to finally claim their first cup with Rising Tide winning the West Division Cup. Obviously, the Central Division Cup was a very, very difficult one for Chicago Icemen to turn around and then get that victory. But I think the LVC one was one we probably thought that would happen. We would have predicted at the beginning of the season. However, going into it, I don't think that we were quite as sure that they were going to get the job done, especially after how they played when they were in Boston. So huge shout out to LVC for turning it around and really, I mean, capitalizing on their season. I mean, they're right back where they were from the previous year.
Absolutely. So Team LVC, they get the cup win in the standings. They are now guaranteed to make the playoffs. And the only way they don't win the East Division is if one of their East Division rivals, either Boston or Northeast, goes out and wins the VLA Cup. That's the only way that LVC could not win the East Division regular season. So, however, that tournament overall, I know it was only 10 teams compared to, I think, 14 on the West Coast and 20 in the Central. Really, really good tournament. Everybody that played from Team LVC all the way on down to like Niagara Frontiersmen, Beer City Brewers, teams like that ended up playing consolation games. Nobody was making their season debut at that point. Everybody had already played volleyball this season. Everybody already had identities. They already had play styles. They already had experience in the VLA Cup tournament formats, and that made it a lot more, I wouldn't say more competitive because every one of these tournaments has been insanely competitive, but more like we hit the ground running first thing Saturday morning that weekend. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things is teams are really starting to get to know each other.
Yeah.
When you start off and you get some of these teams that have 0 points and they jump in and they're going against this high seed. I mean, I don't want to say you feel for them or anything like that, but sometimes they run into an Iceman or a Team NV or some team like that that's a pretty difficult round right away. But I think that where the teams are starting to what's happening is the teams are basically being seated where they belong. Now we have a few newcomers every now and then, but I think that teams are finally earning their place, and you're starting to see a little bit more of those storylines where teams are starting to see each other in a first round where it's a consistent thing, and they're kind of jockeying for position there, and it's really neat to see.
That's a great point. Teams not only are teams starting to play each other a lot, and especially some of the tier 2 teams that are taking the initiative and scheduling their own events, like Cleveland and Columbus, for example, they've seen each other going on double-digit number of times this year. Same with like Niagara, they've played a bunch. Like Beer City and Midwest Mac have played a bunch. Like some of these teams are really playing a lot of volleyball, and they're seeing each other a ton. And some of these sort of rivalries are starting to develop. So let's take a look at the bracket here. From the tournament, which you can go check out all the info on the website. It's all still up there from the East Division Cup. So Team LVC wins it. That I agree with you. We kind of expected going in, but I think the Cinderella run of the Kentucky Unicorns all the way to the final has really got to be talked about. They knock off 2 tier 1 teams on their way. They beat the Northeast Force on Saturday. They beat the Boston Bounce on Sunday in the semis to get to Team LVC, who they got smoked by first thing Saturday morning in pool play. And then they put up a massive battle in a great match, a 4-setter in the championship match. So the Unicorns now, I think they have like 31 points on the year alone, and 3 tier 1 teams beaten in like Force Bounce and Swede back in the Central Cup. Like this Kentucky Unicorns team, talk about being seated now where you belong. 31 points in a year before the VLA Cup even happens is ridiculous. And their Cinderella run was probably the most surprising and pleasant surprise, in my opinion, thing of the entire tournament.
Yeah, it was very unexpected in my opinion because they had, I think, maybe 8 or 9 players, and they grinded. The thing I thought was most impressive was they had they got to 23-21, I think, in all 4 of those sets that they lost to LVC. They had the opportunity to close it. They only closed, I think, on set 2, but they had the opportunity to sweep them. Had they just finish it off on those 3 sets, they could have walked away with the championship here. But yeah, they I think they definitely just got a little bit burnt out. Another team still kind of finding their identity a little bit. But I mean, they definitely put tier 2 on notice. It's very, very, very intriguing how they've improved and made the Central Division tier 2 race a little bit more noticeable. I mean, Dive has been considerably at the advantage for a while now, and now all of a sudden you got Unicorn just skyrocketing up there with Buddy Bears, and it's been really interesting to see, and you gotta love rooting for the underdog at this point.
Yeah, it's fun to watch. The Pieper brothers, Corey and Casey, are among the best outside hitters in really in the league, period, especially out of system. The way those guys make choices, hit high hands, hit deep angles, like the way those guys see the game and rip these out of system balls is amazing. And I was talking to LVC coach CJ Dank after they won that tournament, and CJ was like, dude, you were right. We didn't really see the Unicorns' best game first thing Saturday morning for all the reasons that can produce substandard volleyball at like 7:30 on a Saturday morning. But when it got to the final, the Unicorns came to play, and Team LVC could not sleep on that team with the way the Peepers were banging high balls. They defended well, they passed the ball well, they blocked the ball surprisingly well. I figured that LVC would own Kentucky in the middle, and that didn't really happen. But at the end of the day, LVC, like you said, came from behind in 2 of the 3 sets that they won. Like set 4 was a beatdown. It was like 25-16 or 17 or something like that. So it was over long before the last whistle blew. But you're right. The Unicorns led at least by 2 after point 20 in sets 1, 2, and 3. And especially in set 3, I remember LVC went on like a 6-1 run to come back and steal it. And that is the Team LVC that we're used to seeing. They did it. I remember a game last year. They were down 14-11 to Boston in a 5th set, came back and won that one with like a 5-0 run. Like Team LVC just does this stuff. They have the guys. They have the experience that we talk about in VLA Cup Series tournaments that produce success, and this learning experience for both teams. LVC got a tournament win under their belt. They got that roster management experience, figure out what worked, and the Unicorns got experience as well. They had great chances, like you said, even though they couldn't finish it out and win the tournament. You better believe they're going to take some of those memories and some of those experiences to the bank and be even more dangerous next time.
Yeah, I definitely expect that, and I expect Team LVC. A huge shout out to both the Broswell brothers going in there and haven't played this season yet, and they come in and really contributed well. And I think that they were a huge difference finding their rhythm and helping the team get that championship.
For sure, yeah. Good to see Luke Braswell back after I think the last time he said LVC was the Kickoff Classic in 2020, and then his brother Steve, the outside hitter out of St. Francis, both of them played great. That was big to kind of settle LVC's setter position before Joby Ramos gets back next weekend. Little spoiler alert there. Couple other things from this bracket I want to point out. The Boston Bounce once again had a golden opportunity to at least go to the final and couldn't quite get it done. That it was a crazy 5-setter. They lost to the Kentucky Unicorns in the semis on Sunday morning. Boston played great up until that point, but I can't quite put my finger on what it is that is stopping that team from winning a tournament like this. Vince, help me out here.
It's tough because I believe they even got reverse swept in that game against the Unicorns,
Ooh.
which I think that, maybe they kind of let their guard down a little bit and let them back into it. And maybe they thought they had worn them out at that point and was going to just kind of take it and walk over them. But they looked great in the first 2 sets, and then, yeah, it just wasn't quite there. And, that's what makes these guys that 500 level team is, they have it at times and then they don't at other times. And the inconsistency of being able to close out matches, and like you just pointed out with LVC being able to take that 5-setter against them, last season. I mean, that's kind of become their identity. So, we'll see, moving forward how they make those adjustments. But as of right now, I mean, they're just kind of sitting at that 500 mark where they're just kind of a mid, level tier 1 team.
Yeah, and we'll take a look at the standings in a minute. They are still in a pretty good spot to make the playoffs in terms of points per match played. So they're probably not going to get jumped over by 2 different teams of VLA Cup, and we'll talk about this. But yeah, their identity at this point, until proven otherwise, is that they're about a 500 level team, and they're gonna go to the final 4 of a tournament like the East Division Cup. They're probably gonna win a pool. Like they beat Columbus and they beat the River City Flow, who's good. They beat them in pool play, no problem. But until Boston really pushes it to the next level, like to join that elite echelon of tier 1, I think that's their identity kind of is what it is right now. And I sort of think the same thing about the Northeast Force. That's the next team I wanted to talk about because they had a really good pool play. They looked great. They won their pool. They beat Cleveland in pool play in a really good match to take that pool, and then made some completely boneheaded lineup choices in their Saturday night bracket game against the Kentucky Unicorns. They did not put their best lineup out there, and they got stomped 3-0 because of it. And even though like Force comes out of the weekend 3-1, like they did themselves a lot of favors in the standings, but in terms of trying to win a tournament, that was a head scratcher for me from them.
Yeah, it did seem like they weren't exactly trying to get the East Division Cup, and I was concerned about that as well when I saw that match against the Unicorns. It just wasn't the same group of guys that had got them through that, and I don't know if they thought that maybe maybe underestimated Unicorns, which is very possible that could happen, but I just don't think that that's the right route to go if you're trying to, secure, the first possible East Division Cup. But again, like you said, they still made out 3-1. I think that they did what they needed to do as far as like putting them in a position where they can make it to the VLA championships. But it's just one of those things. It is kind of a head scratcher on the approach. Is the approach just to get the easiest points, or is it to win cups? And I think that if that's the case, we wouldn't really know unless we ask them.
Yeah, we can maybe pick their brains about it next weekend at the VLA Cup. But yeah, that was as well as they played. And I'm not just talking about great. They won their pool. In winning their pool, they looked good. They were playing good volleyball. And I was bummed kind of not to see that them put their best foot forward in the bracket. But like you said, 3-1, not bad. If you're not going to win the tournament, tournament placement other than winning doesn't matter at all. It's all about wins and losses and points. And they did do pretty well in points in that tournament. So maybe that forced strategy will pay off a little bit. So before we move on past the East Division Cup, I want to shout out the all tournament team. MVP Jordan Vari, very well deserved. I think every one of those championship like that championship match, all those late set situations, they're trying to make comebacks against the Unicorns, and every time they needed a wacky break point to win the set, it was Jordan Vari getting it done. And we're not surprised about this. If you've watched the VLA before, you've seen this guy destroy people on the right side from the service line. So well-deserved MVP for Jordan. Setter nod for all tournament goes to Anthony Rivera, the River City Flow. That was extremely well-deserved. He had an amazing tournament, scoring a decent number of points on offense and blocking, and he had an ace serve to beat Cleveland, I think, in a really good quarterfinal match. On match point to win that one. So well deserved for Ant. Outside hitters, Steve Braswell from Team LVC, like you said, had an awesome tournament, his VLA debut. And then Corey Pieper from the Unicorns is ridiculous. If you haven't watched him play yet, you're in for a treat at the VLA Cup. Jake Luby from the Unicorns, the all tournament opposite. We get to a second opposite in there because Vari gets the MVP. But Luby was really good. He's a left-hander. He's got really good range. He really doesn't make errors, and he will just surprise you with the shots that he can hit, especially out of the back row. Thought he was good. I thought Lance Rogers in the middle was great. I thought Skylar Kaufman in the middle for Boston was really good. And then Michael Hickey for the Unicorns was the most impressive libero to me at the tournament. So that's your all tournament team. We got those guys some Axio trainers, which was great. And looking forward to giving some more of those out next weekend.
Yeah, I like some of the consistency here. I mean, you see Skylar Kaufman, a name that you're going to see, all the time. I mean, he's just a staple for the Boston Bounce. Had a really, really solid tournament. And like you said, the Jordan Vari, you can't say enough about the guy. The guy just continues to produce for LVC, being, kind of the backbone of that team, in my opinion. He got the, MVP that he deserved, first team all, VLA last season, and he's pretty much putting together that same type of season this year. So it's really, really neat to see him continue to produce.
Yep. So far, so good on the year for Jordan and Team LVC. So I think that's about it for the East Division Cup, right, Vince? You want to move on to some of the other volleyball that we've missed the last month or so?
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that, I'm alluding to the second regular season event in the Central Division. This was in Louisville maybe 3 weeks ago. Amazing event at the JVA World Challenge. We love being there. Huge crowds around that main court. The live streams did great. The in-person atmosphere looked incredible. I was bummed that I couldn't be there. But sure enough, the Chicago Icemen completely cement a stranglehold on the Central Division, going 4-0, a perfect 12 points, and they are absolutely dominating that Central Division. What do they got? 35 points. Their next closest competitor is 17. So they're doubling up both of their Central Division rivals. So I think it's safe to say that the Central Division belongs to Chicago, but with Team Pineapple showing up and laying an egg, 0-4 with 0 points, there is a very serious race now between the Chicago Swede and Team Pineapple. Extremely close, only 2 points separated right now. And the VLA Cup next weekend will decide which of those teams, if any, make the playoffs.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting coming down to it. Huge shout out to Iceman. This is the team that we thought that they have been. They just haven't before. I guess the last season didn't really put it together. Didn't look amazing in the first event. Comes out and this, wins the Central Division Cup. Turns this one around, goes 4-0. It's finally this is the Iceman that we thought that they were. And so you got to look at them as they're finally on that path to where they're as dangerous or would be looked to as just as big of a threat as an LVC. And you got to think that these two are going into the VLA Cup as heavy favorites. Then you go to Pineapple, and it just became, maybe again the team that we may have expected them to be at the beginning of the season. They came out really hot, 3-1, and then they turn around. I think they went 2-2 in or 3-1.
Yeah, they actually
And
went 3-1. They kind of did
yeah,
what the Northeast Force did. They won their pool. They lost their first bracket game, or they lost a bracket game and won a consolation game.
right,
So
right.
yeah,
And so at 4-2, I mean, looking, or sorry, 6-2, looking pretty good. And then yeah, unfortunately 0-4. And you got to give credit to Swede and at this point, because Swede, it was initially my pick to win the division. The way that they had play, the way that they do play together, the way they have a lot of really good a few overseas guys coming back, that will give them a really good kick going into the VLA Cup. But I mean, I think this goes to Swede's identity. Swede knows who they are. I think Team Pineapple's still figuring it out, and it's going to be a really interesting race going into the VLA Cup.
I like that take a lot. I think that that's a good summary. Swede knows who they are. Team Pineapple's still trying to figure it out. And even though that the points column and the wins column hasn't gone Swede's way, their upside is a little more visible than Team Pineapple's at this point. I think Team Pineapple is really unpredictable, and I think Swede next weekend at the VLA Cup is going to be a legitimate threat. They know who they are. They're putting the right pieces together, and they did in this event in Louisville what they had to do. Even if they weren't going to steal a match from the Icemen, they had to take 6 points from Team Pineapple. They absolutely had to have a chance to even take second in this division, and they did. And I think they get a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be, again, interesting to see how these play out, going into the VLA Cup and the format that it is. There's not going to be any cakewalk matches for any of our teams.
Oh,
So,
no, definitely not.
So, I mean, that right there, both Pineapple and Swede are going to have to earn it. And it's going to be exciting to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, so the matches here in Louisville, we had 3 4-setters on Saturday, three setters on Sunday. So the points pretty evenly distributed. Not a whole lot of drama in terms of the wins and losses, but I think where things get really interesting is when we look at the standings. So let's do that. Let's kind of take a bird's eye view of the league here for a second. So as far as Tier 1 overall goes, you've got those 3 main contenders, the Icemen, Team LVC, and the Rising Tide, who have cup wins, and we know that we're going to the playoffs. So after that, we've got 5 teams fighting for 3 playoff spots. Vince and the Phoenix Ascension right now look pretty darn good. I know you guys haven't played in like 2 months, but you're the only team among those 5 above 2 points per match played average, and you're above that by a lot, like 7-1, very comfortable. All you have to do is not completely throw it away in the VLA Cup and then in Long Beach later in the month. But it is looking like Vince's guys are going to the playoffs. So I think after that, we're looking at 4 teams for 2 spots: Boston, Northeast, Indiana, and the Chicago Swede. And right now, I really don't know how to predict that. Boston has the edge. Obviously, it's a 7-5 and more points. But if they have a bad VLA Cup tournament, they could easily get leapfrogged by a couple of these teams who are really going to bolster their rosters heading into next weekend. So I'm fascinated to see how this goes. There's going to be a lot of clarity on the playoff picture at the end of next weekend. It might even be locked in. We'll see.
Yeah, it's very possible. It'll really depend on how Ascension does, whether or not it's locked in, I think,
Yeah.
because we're the only ones that would play afterwards. But yeah, it's really, really, like I said, exciting to see. Swede made this interesting race, because if Swede laid an egg last week and went 0-4, or 2 weeks ago went 0-4, then now we're just talking about 3 teams, and Swede's kind of irrelevant. They put themselves in a position where all they have to do is have a repeat of the Central Division Cup last year, which is very possible for them to do. And now they're back up there on top. Ascension has had their moments where, hasn't performed at VLA Cup. 2 years ago, yeah, in 2021, I mean, went 1-3. So there's a lot of possibilities in this where, teams are not going to get those easy wins like they did last year. Obviously, we'll talk about that next week in the format, but they're not going to get those easy victories. And each team here is going to have to earn it.
100%. Yeah. You do not make it to the Tier 1 playoffs without earning those spots. And it is cool that Swede has now put themselves very much as part of the conversation. And I mean, you see right there in the dead center, perfectly average in every number, 6-6, 1.5 points per match played. The Northeast Force are a player now. Like who would have thought that after going 0-4 in the first event of the year? They've put themselves back in the mix. So it's going to come down to the VLA Cup as far as the Tier 1 playoffs go, and I'm really excited to see it. I mean, we don't really need to look at the Tier 1 division standings in that much detail because I think they're pretty much set. We know who the division winners are going to be, and so after that, it's kind of all jumbled into one. It's the top 3 out of the remaining 5. So I think we can probably take a look at Tier 2. You good for that, Vince?
Yep, absolutely.
Sweet. So let's look at Tier 2 and check out, I'll go a little division by division here. We talked a little earlier about the Central Division of Tier 2. Look at the Kentucky Unicorns, man. 31 points in less than a year without even having played the VLA Cup yet. They made huge progress going to the East Division Cup. That was a hugely positive trip for them. They're right behind the 630 Buddy Bears, who have played way more volleyball than the Unicorns have. I don't know if I see them catching Milwaukee Dive. A reminder that the Central Division is a race to 100 to see who gets promoted. I think Milwaukee's got too much of an advantage, but it's pretty reasonable to expect a Kentucky Unicorns Tier 1 team in the not too distant future at this rate.
Yeah, I mean, the way that they are organized, Shane Green, you got to give him a huge shout out. He's doing a lot of the right things for those guys, and he's got them really on the right track to, just playing as much volleyball as possible. And you got to give that whole area, the whole, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all of those, states are really producing a lot of volleyball right now, and they're playing each other consistently. Crimson's over there. You got Kong. You got Midwest Mac. Now you got Beer City Brewers. You got Niagara, and they're playing so much volleyball, and that's the reason that Crimson has exploded. That's the reason that Unicorns are where they're at, and that's just because of that consistency of playing, and that's what we like to see in the VLA is who is going to get out there and who's going to go and play those matches. So huge shout out to the Unicorns because they're definitely getting done. 31 points already at this point, and then they're hosting the Tier 2 championships. Not to drop anything like that, but I mean they're already set for that, and they're going to get 2 more events. Going into the final of this year, they could end up with 60 points by the end of the year.
That is ridiculous to think about. And I mean, even after that, right in the middle of sort of that Tier 2 Central Division, Milwaukee Gold, Beer City Brewers, Southside XP, Midwest Mac, all like deadlocked with really just about one tournament each this year. They've played sparingly in exhibitions. The Brewers in particular, they've played a bunch of exhibitions. They're systematically picking up points here and there. I don't think they're going to be a factor in any of those teams are going to be a factor getting promoted anytime soon, but it's the experience, it's the repetitions that when you go into a tournament like the VLA Cup next weekend, these teams who have a bunch of matches played this year are going to have more success than their points column shows because they have played so much more than some of these other teams that are just relying on carryover points or just playing only their Division Cup tournament. Like these mid-tier, relatively new teams are dangerous, and they're dangerous because of the amount of volleyball that they're playing, and that's what we love to see.
Yeah, and they're all definitely figuring it out. I mean, there's a system to it. There's a formula to it. Some of the teams will figure it out a little bit quicker than others. But, I mean, you see it right there. I mean, just the jump with the Unicorns. You see, Milwaukee Gold's had some success. You've seen, Beer City Brewers. I mean, they came out of nowhere. Basically, 2 weeks, I think, before the Central Division Cup, jumped in there, started grabbing points. And, now they're moving up their rankings. And it's really, really neat to see how some of these teams are really starting to catch on, figure it out, and put those things together at such a quick pace.
Oh, yeah, that's what Tier 2 is all about. Let's check out the East Division. This is getting very interesting, especially because of that one random, almost like outlier at this point when Cleveland won the East Division Cup last year. That cup win in the standings, we were wondering how significant that was going to be in terms of promotional targets because the targets in the East are 100 points or 3 cup tournaments won. Now that the River City Flow has passed Cleveland in points at 48-47, I'm not sure that cup win is going to help Cleveland very much anymore if they're trying to get promoted, unless they win like this year's Tier 2 championship and next year's Tier 2 championship. Like that's the only way I see those cup wins coming into play. Now with River City doing what they're doing, they had a pretty good run at the East Division Cup. I think it's going to be the points column that dominates the East Division race now.
Well, I'll tell you the biggest factor that that cup win had is that it had put them at the 3 seed, 4 seed in every single cup that they've played.
Good point.
And they have gotten victories on all of those pretty much. And so the fact that they're able to go and they're playing some of those lower seeded teams where River City Flows had to match up against like an Iceman. I think they played maybe Team Envy in one, teams like that where, that's the difference between 3 points. And now you see Kong was significantly lower in points, and now they're only one behind. They've really caught up because of the amount more that they are playing than
Yeah,
Flo
look at that.
is.
19 matches this year versus 8 for Flo. Cleveland is playing so many exhibition games plus 2 tournaments that they're doing it. They want points. They understand that every single point you can grab matters.
Yeah, and they're basically at 22 for the season, where Flo's at 12. And Flo's had kind of limped into some of these events. Obviously, not having Sam Elvis for both of the cup events that they've played so far has been a huge factor. But you look at what Kong has done, and Kong is really doing the right things, as we kind of said with the unicorns. They're grabbing a lot of points, and so they're actually making this a factor with points. Where the cup comes into, cup win comes into play is definitely that seeding, where they're always going to be a high seed. And that gives them a pretty good advantage in this division. I think that's really where you'll see that factor and the value of getting one of those victories. But moving forward into some of these other teams, you look at what Lost Travelers has done, and they've been kind of pretty much the same. I mean, they're playing their typical volleyball that they've played throughout the last 2 seasons. Then you got Crimson there, and then Crimson's the exact same way as the Unicorns. I mean, just
25 matches played this year. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's 25 points that they've got for the season, and they're in a great position to make it to the Tier 2 championships too. So, it's these teams that have gone out and they've worked hard to get and facilitate these extra Tier 2 matches. And I mean, it's paying off, because now Crimson, who was basically a last seed in some of these earlier cups, are now going to be probably, I think, maybe
more like a 3 on the 3 seed line at least, like maybe a 9, 10, 11 seed amongst Tier 2 teams, if not higher than that. Like that's exactly it. That's the value of playing all these games. You're starting to improve your seed, and that matters. That turns into points.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, that's where it's really, you see that value of playing those extra matches. But I mean, it's just been really impressive. I did not, at the beginning of this Tier 2 season, I know we implemented this format at this year, and it's our first year. I did not expect this many points to be gathered by any of these teams. I expected, more than last year, obviously. I mean, there's no way not to, but I didn't expect teams to really jump in and grab 25 points, 31 points, 22 points before the VLA Cup. And so the way that these teams are playing each other, and they're figuring these things out, it's really, really neat to see.
Yeah, it's nuts. You guys should see our database of every match played this year. We got it marked whether it's an exhibition or not, and the number of exhibition games that have been played. And for every one of those, if you win an exhibition game, you get a point. The number of those that have been played is ridiculous. It is awesome to see teams taking initiative and scheduling their own games and being rewarded for playing well. So that's what it's all about. I think the East Division is really where a lot of that activity is happening. And now looking at the West is very interesting because there's so much going on kind of in the middle of the pack. Obviously, Team NV, we knew coming into this year, they were going to start from the bottom. That was going to create some weird seeding situations early because they're a championship caliber team. Now at 29, they're going to get seeded where they belong. But after that, there's a sort of a lot of these teams between like Dallas at 16, even on down to like San Diego at 9, even Utah at 6. There's going to be some interesting movement for the rest of the season in the Tier 2 West Division because not so many of these teams are making the trip to the VLA Cup. A lot from the East and the Central are, but there are a couple of these teams who I thought were really going to be a factor for the VLA Cup and just to make some noise in the West Division Tier 2, like Bay Area Dimes, West Coast Brigade, Phoenix Valor, San Diego Wave. Like some of those teams are not coming to the VLA Cup, and I'm surprised and honestly a little disappointed by that.
Well, that's one thing that you kind of expected, or I wouldn't say expected. I mean, the way that they played in the West Division Cup, and all four of the teams that you just mentioned, and not counting Brigade, go into that in a moment. But the other four teams, I mean, they came out and they did great. I mean, grabbing 9 points, 10 points here and there. I mean, that's a good successful tournament. The problem is that then they turned around and they didn't really play too much else. It seemed like that was kind of the focus of their season, was to play those matches. And I won't say that about Wave. Wave is going to be playing in the final West Division Tier 1 matchups in Long Beach. But the other teams were, like you said, we kind of expected them to be at some of these events. And with Valor dropping out, Dimes dropping out, or not, not even coming into play at all. It did make this West Division race a little more interesting, because now you've got a team like Kingsman, who's all of a sudden got 10 points because they played some exhibitions. They played the Central Division Cup, and now they're going to be playing the VLA Cup, and they're going to be jumping up there in the ranks. You got Dogs, who had 2 fantastic events, playing in West Division Cup and then Central Division Cup. Now they're a huge factor. Team Envy obviously is going to move up, but we've kind of known the story about them, where they don't really seem like they're interested in playing Tier 1. So that race becomes a little bit more interesting, because I think before we expected Brigade to be the team that was going to move forward, and then Brigade has had some issues with retaining players and whatnot. And so they actually had to drop out of a handful of events where we expected them. Last year, they played every single cup. This year, they only played 1 cup, and then they played the first event in Phoenix for the West Division. And so since they've kind of dropped off and they've almost become like really a non-factor in that race.
They are a non-factor, 1-7 on the year with only 3 points, and they were in such a good position coming in.
Yeah, and it's very unfortunate, because I know the Jacob and Ken Martinez, they really work hard for that team, trying to make sure that they're set up the right way. But then you gotta, that's why we do these things. That's why the Tier 2 has this type of format, because you can't go off of one season of success. You have to understand that a Tier 1 team needs to have, a Tier 2 team needs to prove to be in Tier 1. They need to be able to successfully compete 4 or 5 events every single year. So, I mean, it's how the system kind of works, and it's kind of played out the right way in the case of the Brigade. But now you're seeing other teams start to kind of catch up and proving where they belong in this West Division race. And it's going to be interesting to see after the VLA Cup how this pans out, and where teams kind of lie, and then how they proceed into next season. I really don't think that we're going to see a West Division team get promoted this season. I think it's pretty much impossible at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Unless, I don't know, maybe Dallas. I think they're the only one that has a chance. They would have to get 34 points, and that is absolutely absurd. So they would have to maybe like win the VLA Cup and win the Tier 2 championship tournament. Maybe that would do it. They got 2 cup wins.
They would have to get 2 cup wins. I don't. Point wise, it's impossible for them to.
Yeah, I don't see 34 is not happening. So, by the way, if you're new to the show, if you're new to the VLA, you can check out the website. I've got it up on the screen here. Go do some digging around. If you go to the standings tab and you scroll down, we've laid out all this math and this format and this Tier 2 system that we always talk about on the show. So if you've got any questions about how the format works, definitely give that a read, because I think this format is absolutely awesome. And the teams that have really learned it, embraced it, and taken initiative to play games and to put themselves in these positions in Tier 2 like we're talking about, they are the ones that are going to be factors at the VLA Cup. They're going to be the ones that are factors in getting promoted the next year or two. And that's all because the format of the league is so great. So give that a read if you're unfamiliar with it. Just a better picture of what we got going on here before next weekend's tournament. Anything else we want to dig into in the standings, Vince?
No, I'd like to give a shout out though to Atlanta Bobcats.
Nice, yeah.
We're really excited to finally get down into that area, the South. We haven't had too many teams. I mean, Dallas, obviously, you got Ascension, I guess, if you consider them, south or more southwest. But it's great to see a team like the Atlanta, especially. I believe they are from. I'm sorry, forgetting the club name.
Oh, do they have a club attached to them? Yeah, I'm not sure of
A
it either.
A5, I think, or I can't remember. But Braden down there, he's doing a great job. I'm really happy to see them playing out there. They look pretty good actually when they
They
played in
did look
Louisville,
good.
and so I'm excited to see that. I mean, their jerseys look great too. Got a little bit
Jerseys
purple.
look great.
Uh,
Vince, no bias towards purple
yeah,
jerseys.
no, not at all. But yeah, no, it's really neat to see them come out, and I'm looking forward to seeing them and what they can do in the 2023-24 season.
Yeah, good for them. I mean, it is worth pointing out that like during that Louisville Tier 1 event, like we talked about at the JVA World Challenge, that wasn't the only VLA ball going on at that event. We had a Tier 2 event organized and kind of spearheaded by Shane Green of the Kentucky Unicorns, which was awesome. Yeah, I think Unicorns, Kong, Madison Inferno came down. The Atlanta Bobcats came up to make their debut in that event. There were a bunch of exhibition points handed out at that one. So yeah, those are already shown up and having their impact in the standings. So yeah, good for Atlanta. Looking forward to seeing them next year.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, I have something that I would like to do, and I've been thinking about this, and I was thinking about it at the East Division Cup, and I don't usually do this as kind of the unbiased voice of the league, but one of the things that we want, Vince, is we want the overall level of the VLA to improve, right? I think that's fair to say. We want the league to grow, but I would like to give some advice to all the teams out there right now, especially the Tier 2 teams, about a really easy thing that you can do to improve the quality of your on-court volleyball, and that is serving. I think we've got a lot of work to do as a league in terms of the level of serving that we're displaying. Now, some of the guys on the Tier 1 level, I see Vince nodding along, smiling because he probably knows where I'm going with this. A lot of the guys at the Tier 1 level, you've got some green light servers, right? You've got guys well above 60 miles an hour jump spin serving. You've got guys legitimately scoring points. Great. If you have those guys, let them loose. Let them go back and score points. But everybody else, I really want at the VLA Cup next weekend, I want to see teams serving smarter. I want to see teams going back to the service line with intention. I want there to be strategies talked about before matches. I want to see guys going back to the service line and thinking and making decisions, smart choices about who they're going to serve, where they're going to serve, understanding the situations of a game, how aggressive to be, where you fit in the mix of the other servers around you on your team. Like, we've got to be a little bit better at serving as a league. And please, please stop missing float serves. Oh my goodness, it kills me to see so many float service errors. It is absolutely brutal when you're in overtime and even in a fifth set, which I saw at the East Division Cup, and you're float serving the ball into the net. Please stop doing that for my own heart's sake. But I mean, have conversations with your teams. Talk about it in practice. Talk about it in matches. Identify serving targets on other teams. Give your servers zones, or if you're serving, go back to the line with a plan. Turn your brain on instead of off when you go back to serve. I would like to see some more intentional and high-level serving across the board. That goes for everybody. And you better believe, like, this is an easy, controllable thing that if you start to do this at next weekend's tournament, you will play better. I promise. So let's improve the overall serving level of the league a little bit. We've got some work to do. I promise if you just put a little bit of intention into what you're doing from the service line, it can really help.
Yeah, I like what Chris Lanke pointed out. West Division Cup location in February. Yeah, it was a little tough on some ends to serve, but I mean, you can still got to make your serve.
But that's what I'm saying. It's not all about strong serving. It's about serving smart.
I have not played this season. I know for a fact that has played a factor in the serve made to miss ratio.
Vince is famous for never missing serves. That's true.
And so I'll take a I mean, I know a couple of years ago I played a full event and didn't miss a single serve. I think I was 37 for 37.
Oh my god!
But yeah, I mean, and jump serves too. So don't miss your float serves. I'm with you on that one.
Don't miss
that
float serves.
I hate missed float serves more than anything. But especially in the net, if you're gonna miss it, hit the back wall at least. but yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. You got to stop missing your serves.
Stop missing serves. Let's serve a little bit smarter. And speaking of float serves and service strategy and all sorts of these things that are going to come into the play of the VLA Cup tournament next weekend, I don't know how good of a segue that really is, but I think that it is time, Vince, that we finally give some spotlight and talk a little bit about the VLA Women's division. It's been lurking in the background for a while since we announced that it was going to be a thing several months ago. Teams have been showing some interest, and now we know that at next weekend's VLA Cup, we will have the debut, the first ever 8-team VLA women's division at the VLA Cup. It is going to be awesome, and we'll talk more about the rosters and the format of next week's show. But I at least this week wanted to introduce who the 8 women's teams are that are going to be playing next weekend. That sound good?
Absolutely, let's do it. And
Yeah.
I will say this about the women's. It's one of those things where the VLA is founded by teams. It's founded by the players and the teams, and it's run and organized and everything like that. And so I think one of the things that the women's division, I don't think it would. I think that we have a lot of interest. I mean, I know for a fact I get the emails, I get the messages all the time. I talk to a lot of potential team reps. But what it is that it's just more people understanding that the way that we operate is team player based. And so I'm really excited to see how we grow with the VLA. On the women's side, I think that a lot of people will start to recognize the potential of it, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that progresses. But I will say that it's taken a little bit to catch on because of I think a lot of people always wait for, okay, when is someone going to do this, instead of taking that initiative and going, I'm going to do this. So
Right. Right.
so yeah, so I'm really interested to see how it progresses after this event. It's going to be an amazing event. I'm really, really excited about it.
So yeah, we've got 8 women's teams that are helping us be sort of the forerunners of the VLA women's division. I know they're excited about it. I know they're motivated, and I at least want to shout out who they are, where they're from, a little bit about them if we can before we talk more about the women's division on next week's show. And I think the only place to start, Vince, is one that's certainly familiar to you: the Phoenix Ascension, one of the founding 5 Tier 1 men's franchises. Is in fact putting in a women's team to the VLA Cup next weekend. I'm stoked about this. Vince, tell me about the work that you have done and the work that the girls have done under the Ascension umbrella to put this team together, and just kind of a little bit about the Phoenix area women's volleyball community.
Well, I mean, the girls have actually been doing a lot more work than I have about it. I pretty much just, had them try on some shirts and then ordered them. But no, it's really neat. We have a pretty solid community out here. A lot of players, love to play. It's been talked about for a while to get something of this kind of, I guess, dedication to try to do a little bit more than just your average region tournaments and things like that, and playing your basic nationals every year. I think that there was a lot of demand for having a little something more, and so I talked to a few of the girls. Bella Perea, she's one that has really kind of stepped to me and said, hey, let's try to do this. She had organized, was actually I think the double B MVP last year of USAV Nationals, and won the championship there. So I have a little bit of and just kind of a little bit about sorry about I don't know what's happening here.
There's a little bit of playback going on there.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from, but anyway, so it's been really neat to see how everything has kind of come together. We have a solid group of actually 25 players that are playing in the in our gym, and consistently practicing, and it's the same thing that we basically did with the men's side, where we have a substantial. Actually, the men's side have about 30, and we kind of go with our tier 1, tier 2, team 9. So with the women's side, we're kind of looking to do something similar, where we have basically Ascension, and we can. You just know how difficult it is to make sure that you always have players represented at different events and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunities for players to travel, to compete, and you can't do that with just 12 players. You got to do it with with a program. So I think that I have a lot of experience, obviously, running the Ascension men's program, trying to implement that into the women's side and just get the ball rolling and give them an opportunity to play. And they do a lot of great work for themselves. They do a great job promoting. They do a great job working hard for sponsorships. And so they're definitely right on the right path as far as that end goes. Now, I mean, we know nothing about any of the teams. We have not played a single set of competition. So you don't know how that's going to factor into the actual event itself. I mean, we're playing great in practices, but how that translates, I think that we're going to go in with some confidence. And I think that, it's just a big unknown at this point. So it's going to be really cool to see those first matches play out and how this first event goes. And, then I think from there you can kind of gauge, okay, this is what we need to do to improve, or, what we need to do to be, potential tier one, one of the first women's tier one teams.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. The format, and we'll talk about this on next week's show. Like the league format on the women's side will be identical to the men's. The teams will earn points the same exact way. They can play exhibitions the same exact way. And once enough teams get to a certain mark, and we don't really know what that is yet, but eventually the women's teams that play enough will form a VLA tier 1 level on the women's side. And that obviously will be a couple years down the road. But it is great to see one of the tier 1 founding 5 men's teams in Ascension that has had success and that has figured out how the league works. I mean, they have some pretty strong leadership over there with Vince, who wrote the book on how the league works. But it's cool to see your girls taking so much initiative. I'm excited to see how it manifests on the court, because you're right. At next weekend's tournament, nobody knows anything about anybody. I love that. It's completely unpredictable. We seeded the 8 teams just on like the order when they signed up. So seeds mean absolutely nothing. It is going to be a blast to see them all go at it. So anything else about Ascension Women's before you keep it going with the rest of the teams?
No, I'm really excited about getting them out there, and I know they're jonesing to be on the court, so it's going to be a great event for us.
Awesome. So speaking of tier 1 men's teams that are sponsoring women's teams, next up we've got the Northeast Force. The Northeast Force out of Norwalk, Connecticut. Really actually the closest team we have in the league to New York City proper. The Northeast Force, they are men's team, made their tier 1 debut last year. Their women's team will make their debut next weekend. And if you've watched Northeast Force, you've heard me talk about Captain Garrett Minyard, who owns the Northeast Volleyball Club there in Connecticut. He runs the Force's men's team. His wife, Kat Minyard, is spearheading the Northeast Force women's team, who I haven't seen it firsthand, but I hear she was quite the baller in her prime, playing a little bit of overseas ball. So I'm excited to see what the Northeast Force brings. I'm happy that we've got representation coast to coast as we debut the women's division. We've got a Phoenix and a little bit more West Coast representation that we'll talk about later. But Northeast Force, the only true East Coast team making the trip on the women's side, and I'm stoked about that. I'm really glad we have the representation in that area, and I know that that Garrett and Kat and their structure with Northeast Volleyball Club and their community they've got is probably going to produce some pretty good volleyball. So shout out to the Northeast Force women's team. I'm excited to see them.
Yeah, definitely excited, and also it's good to have another established tier 1 team. Northeast Force being who they are, to be involved. You like to see that kind of experience. We know what we're getting out of that leadership. So, there's a lot of unknowns in the tier 2. There's a lot of unknowns. I mean, this is literally just a sign up and play type of league. So, anyone can show up and put in a team, and, they become VLA that way. And, but I mean, it's good to have that representation where it's like, okay, well, we know who's coming into this.
Yeah. Totally. So another team that's younger, as we've talked about throughout this show, but already established, and that we trust their leadership, and they're put in a women's team, is the Kentucky Unicorns. So Shane Green has been posting all sorts of stuff about holding some tryouts throughout the Unicorns region that they encompass. So it says here they're based in Lexington in Kentucky. They've got footholds in Louisville. They've got footholds in Cincinnati, Ohio. They've got footholds in southern Indiana. So there's a pretty big radius of volleyball communities that are wrapped up in what the Unicorns have got going on there. We already talked about the success of their men's team this year. They're putting in a women's team next weekend. And Lexington, certainly a hot pocket for women's volleyball with University of Kentucky winning the national championship a couple years ago. I'm excited about this. I know that Shane has worked hard. He's already learned what it takes to have success at the VLA level, and I'm excited to see that from the girls on the Unicorn side.
Yep, absolutely.
So also another team that has VLA history, it's putting in a women's team, the Madison Embers from Madison, Wisconsin. They're sort of the sister franchise of the Madison Inferno, both associated with the Madison Inferno Juniors Club. We got the Inferno men's team and the Embers women's team now on the VLA level. Speaking of cities that have recent NCAA women's champions, Madison, Wisconsin is a huge women's volleyball community. And the Inferno Embers, or we'll just call them the Embers for the most part, they've got a women's team coming in as well. They've been super active on social media the last couple of weeks. They are ready to go for the VLA Cup. So I'm excited to have them as well.
Yeah, this is a team right here where they are doing a lot of the right things. Madison Inferno does a lot of the right things as well, where they do a lot of self-promotion. They're involved with the club, and that's a great way to be. And then you got Madison Embers, who actually Caitlin and Hannah were
I think we're maybe. Yeah, the sisters.
The sisters. Yeah, they do a fantastic job of helping with the Inferno team. So it was really kind of a no-brainer with them. I think that they were probably ready to have this happen just about the exact same time the Inferno had started. So I'm excited to see how they come out and play. I think that they Caitlin, for example, being kind of one of the poster childs of the women's, because Todd J went up and took those pictures of them up in when they played at
that's
Milwaukee
right.
Nights.
Yeah.
And so her face has been all over our social media and whatnot, and so I'm really excited to see how they play and their representation up there.
Totally. So moving on, those four teams are connected to VLA men's teams, a couple tier 1, couple tier 2, like we said. The next four women's teams are not. They're just sort of new to the league. They have their various attachments to their communities, junior clubs and whatever. But I want to start out with the OC Resilient out of Orange County, California. Vince, you probably know more about them being closer to the West Coast than me. But as far as I can see, just like media-wise, this team and this program has got a pretty serious reputation in Southern California. They're really doing a lot for the adult scene, running tournaments, leagues, and now they've got a VLA women's team. It's awesome. I looked at their roster. It looks pretty loaded as far as the Southern California community that I know from a distance. So tell me what you know about OC Resilient.
Well, I believe that they bring a lot of clout to pretty much an unknown league at this point.
For sure.
And it's really, cool to see a team of this caliber, a brand of this caliber, join the VLA. And it's kind of along the same lines of us seeing, like a San Diego Wave brand name kind of come in here and join the VLA men's tier 2. This is kind of along that same lines where you're getting, but on an adult level. This isn't a juniors club. This is OC Resilience. Like you said, they got the tournaments. They have a really solid roster, a very, very good reputation of playing really good volleyball in Southern California, both men's and women's. So this is a huge one for the VLA to get that notoriety of the competition level for what the women's are doing.
Yeah, I can't wait to see them. I have a feeling that they're going to walk into that gym with a little bit of extra swagger and confidence compared to most of the women's teams who might not totally know what they're getting themselves into. OC Resilient gives me the vibe of they don't really care who they're playing against. They're going to walk into a gym and dominate to the best of their ability. And I'm just kind of excited to see the personalities of all the women's teams. That they're going to be new and fun and fun to put on social media and all that. But OC Resilient seems like a brand that brings clout, exactly like you said. I'm excited for that.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so that's going to be cool. That's some more West Coast representation. Sticking in the Midwest for this next one, we've got the Midwest Magic out of Milwaukee. Now, I think there's sort of an indirect relationship with the Milwaukee Dive men's team here, but this Midwest Magic group of the girls encompasses a huge amount of the entire Midwest region. And when you name your team after a region that's as large as the Midwest, you've got a lot of communities that you're representing when you name yourself that. And I know that they're going to deliver a roster that is seriously legit. So the Midwest Magic making their debut, they're technically based out of Milwaukee, but they do actually, as far as I know, represent the entire Midwest region.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I love their their logo.
Logo's great.
It's a
Great
pretty
logo.
sweet logo, yeah. So, yeah, no, I expect them to do really well as well. I mean, like you said, they actually went away from calling themselves the, I think, Milwaukee Magic, because they have a lot of players coming in from outside of the Milwaukee area. So, just there's a lot of talent in the Midwest, and again, like you said, to represent the entire Midwest, you're going to have a pretty solid team.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm in Chicago. I know the volleyball community, at least in Chicago and Wisconsin as well, and kind of the greater Midwest about as well as anyone. And let me know, Vince, if this is the case in Phoenix as well, or like other places in the country. But in my opinion, the girls who play Division One level, like really intense volleyball, do one of two things when they're done. They either go overseas and they go overseas and play, and they get into it full time, or a lot of them that don't go play overseas really take a big step back from the game. I think in the women's game we see a much greater rate of burnout than the men's. I think like the men's community in Chicago is unbelievable, and it's so active. At the highest levels that we have players, every high level player like who played great volleyball in college still plays volleyball regularly in Chicago. But I think on the women's side, that's not totally the case. I think you've got a lot of like dormant women's players who have taken some time off from the game, who've like stepped away from the intensity of the game at the Division One level. And I think we're going to start to see a couple of those players reignite sort of their appetites for volleyball with a tournament like this. And I think the Midwest Magic is a team that can kind of uproot some of those players who have been away from the game for a couple years and get them back excited about the game of volleyball again. Is that something that you've noticed in the women's community too?
Oh, 100%, especially the Division One players. I think that they grind for so long, usually from 8, 9 years old, nonstop till they're 22, 23. And yeah, some of them will, maybe go to have a stint overseas. They maybe see the national team gym for a little bit, and they just recognize eventually that, man, I'm tired. I want to,
Yeah.
have, get married, have a family, something along those lines, maybe just, do something else for a little bit, and I think one of the big factors is that it takes a lot to go overseas. I mean, I played for 4 seasons overseas, and it's not something you can just do if you have a life here. And a lot of those Division One players, they finish their degree, and it's okay. Do I jump into my field where I can go and make maybe $70,000 a year, or I can go overseas and live off pennies and just enjoy an experience? And it's kind of a no-brainer to a lot of them who have worked so hard to get that degree. So I mean, I again, when we talk about the burnout, you're going to see a lot of, I think, Division Two, Division Three, NAIA, some college club players. I mean, kind of like what the VLA has already kind of become on the men's side. I mean, you see that all the time where you got a lot of guys. You look at any roster, there's not just D1 players on any team. So I think that is going to ignite, like you said, a lot of players to kind of come out of the woodwork and and just say, hey, I want to kind of see what's going on. I want to see what this is about. They're going to recognize, oh, this isn't this demanding. This isn't, something I have to go and kill myself over, day in and day out and train. I can go and play a tournament, and, it's, there's not that pressure to win at the Division One level, and I think that you're right. I think that you're going to start to see a lot of these former D1 players, high level players come out, and eventually they will be involved.
Yeah, it's great. We're giving these girls a chance to play volleyball for fun. And I don't know if a lot of players who did that grind like all the way through junior club, Division One, maybe a little bit overseas, there probably became a point in their careers where they weren't doing volleyball for fun anymore. They were doing it because it was their job, or they had to keep a scholarship or whatever. And now at the VLA, giving everybody now in installing this women's division and giving people a chance to play volleyball for fun because they want to, and not because they feel like they have to, I think is going to bring a lot of those players who have stepped away from the game back to the game a little bit, because the volleyball is a game that just is built on passion and love of the game. But when it stops being a passion project and starts feeling more like work, then it makes sense to step away from it. So now that we have a chance here for women's volleyball to step back into this spotlight in this format, I think it is really going to bring some former huge names potentially back into the mix, and I'm really excited for that. And part of that is this next team, NIVA, NIVA, out of Northern Indiana. They're calling their adult team BB4, better bring four, as in, like, you can see in their logo, as in like 3 blockers isn't enough to stop me. Next time, better bring 4. I think that's pretty funny. But I went to college in Indiana. I went to Purdue. I spent 5 years in the gym with the Purdue women's team, and I know a lot of the Indiana junior and adult girls volleyball community. I already know for a fact that this NIVA BB4 team is going to bring some superstar names, maybe even from my alma mater, that have been away from the game for a little bit, but are going to come back into the mix for the exact reasons that we just talked about. And that is so exciting to hear.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the thing is we're going to start to hit other markets this way. And people are going to see, or the other players, are going to see, hey, my former teammate is doing this, my former teammate's doing that, oh, I played against that person, I'd like to play against them again, and that type of thing. It's going to spark some of those type of thoughts, and make more people, players, more interested again. And it's exciting to see. And I really like how, right now we've got a lot of teams of from the women's side. It's not convoluted to one area. We literally go coast to coast, like you said, and hitting a lot of different areas. So it's really cool to see the variety that's going into it.
Yeah, I love it, which leads into, like, last but not least, the team that I right now know the least about is the Bluegrass Vengeance, yet another team from Lexington, Kentucky, which is amazing that area can produce not 1 but 2 teams. And like they round out the field of 8 that are going to be our forerunners for this women's division. But exactly like you said, this is only the beginning. Like, to people next weekend in Chicago are going to see that this is happening on the women's side. They're going to see their former teammates. They're going to see their former coaches, their former players. There's so many people that are going to see that there's an opportunity now, and more of this is going to spark up from then on. But it is these 8 teams that are paving the path, and I absolutely love that.
Yeah, and I actually think it's funny that you just said that you surprised, or I'll have to look back at the tape, but it's surprising, or that they had enough to field a second team out of Lexington. I think that pretty much every major city in the United States can probably field about 2 or 3 teams of former college volleyball, women's volleyball players. I know if Arizona just grabbed every single female volleyball player that played in the past 10 years, and we would probably make about 15 to 20 teams. So, I think that there's actually that many players out there. It's just whether or not they actually want to be a part of this or not. The fact that, from my understanding, from what I've talked to you about with Shane, is this team is Shane's team is I don't want to say older, but maybe more experienced, or different kind of group compared to this is a little bit more of an upstart group that is coming out of Lexington. So it's cool to see. You're going to see teams forming kind of like us, Phoenix Valor, same city, different team, Chicago Sweet, obviously Iceman. It's going to happen a lot with the women's, because there are so many players out there, and you're going to see more people seeing the opportunities to be involved in the league, and from a manager perspective, building a franchise, that type of thing, building a brand, like some of us have already started to do. You're going to see a lot of teams in different areas, and that's going to be very beneficial to them. You're looking at 2 Lexington teams right here that don't have to drive maybe more than 20 minutes to play a match, and that's going to be a factor in building the Lexington community. That's as opposed to us, where as Ascension would have to go to, at this point, the only team we have is OC Resilient, has to drive 7 hours to go see them play them. So that's a factor moving into later times, but it's relevant now.
For sure. So that's it. That's the 8 teams that are going to kick us off with the first ever VLA Women's Division next week in Chicago at next week's VLA Cup. So I think that just about does it for the show. Don't forget that next week, we don't exactly know when yet, but next week we will have another episode of Around the VLA to talk way more in detail about the actual details of the VLA Cup tournament. There's a lot to go over. We got to talk about the pools. We got to talk about the format of the tournament once the seeds get set on Monday. But before we do that, I do want to let people know that the VLA Cup tab on our website is already set to go. The only thing that's not in there is the seeds for tier 2, and I think the seeds for the women's. But all the info you need on kind of how the tournament works, including live spectator info, the schedule. This is a 3-day event next Friday, Saturday, Sunday in suburban Chicago. Most of what you need is already on the website. So there's like this table of contents here. You can click to catch the areas you want. It gives you an overview of the formats. It gives you, we do know the tier 1 groups. Here's a little spoiler for what we're going to talk about on next week's show. A lot of the stuff for the VLA Cup tournament is already on the website. So go give that a look, and more of that will be updated on Monday once all the seeds are set and the schedule is finalized.
Yep, and we're excited to bring that information, talk about that next week. I mean, it's gonna. I just I'm just going crazy about how this is finally coming together. It's a project that the league has been working on. You and myself obviously put a lot into creating this event, and it's really exciting that it's almost here.
It's here. I was looking through my emails and like just some digging through my Google Drive. I found that the Google spreadsheet for this year's VLA Cup tournament, you shared it with me over a year ago. Literally, this has been a VLA brainchild for an extremely long time, including the women's division, including like the way we have tier 1 and tier 2 on the men's side separate for pool play, but together in the bracket. It's going to be incredible. So we'll talk about it on next week's episode of Around the VLA. But if you want to dig into it now, a decent amount of the info that you're looking for is on the website, and it is going to be insane.
Yep, absolutely. 81 matches, 36 teams. I mean, clearly the biggest professional level event that has happened ever in the United States. I think that not even PVL's top had that many teams involved, men's and women's. So extremely excited to bring this to everyone, to the volleyball community in the United States.
That's right. It's going to be huge. It starts a week from Friday. Next Friday, May 12th, the tournament kicks off. But don't worry, we'll be back before then, sometime next week on this very show to talk about it in more detail. So stay tuned here on YouTube to Instagram. Check out all the things on the website to find out when we're doing our next show next week. And we will see you next time on Around the VLA as we get ever closer to the 2023 VLA Cup. It's going to be awesome.
Yep.